Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is a good day for Alberta and a good day for Canada. I do want to start by just acknowledging I've got many ministers here, Minister Brian Jean, Minister Mike Ellis, Minister Mickey Amery, Minister Grant Hunter, Minister Rajan Sani, Minister Matt Jones, Minister Dan Williams, Minister Todd Lowen, Minister Dale Nally, Minister Miles McDougall, Associate Minister Mohammed Yassin, as well as MLAs Garth Rosewell, Justin Wright, and Scott Sinclair. We also have Nancy Southern joining me from ATCO, Mark Poeska from NMAX. We've got Pauline McLean from Capital Power, Candice Payton from Enhance Energy, Mike Rose from Tourmaline, Deb Yedlin, Calgary Chamber of Commerce, Stephen Buffalo, Indian Resource Council, and Dave Lamouche, Métis Settlements General Counsel. The last 10 years have been an extremely difficult time for hundreds of thousands of Albertans and their families whose livelihoods depend on a strong and growing Alberta oil and gas industry. But today we're turning a corner. As I announced with the Prime Minister earlier this morning, I am thrilled to share that the agreement we signed today clearly sets out a pathway to the construction of a new oil pipeline to Asian markets, commencing as early as September 1st, 2027. The proposed West Coast oil pipeline would transport more than 1 million barrels of oil per day. This landmark agreement builds on the collaboration between the federal and provincial governments following the signing of the Alberta-Canada Energy Agreement, which was signed in November of 2025. Our governments have agreed to targeted policy changes that create the conditions necessary for Alberta to significantly increase its energy production and exports to Asian and other global markets. Today's agreement also results in Alberta avoiding a significant increase to the federally mandated industrial carbon tax, saving Alberta's industry partners approximately $250 billion in compliance costs over the next 2 decades to 2050. Under the new carbon pricing agreement, the industrial carbon price will be substantially lower than the previous federal policy, which would have required a carbon price of $170 per tonne by 2030. The headline carbon price will be substantially rolled back. It will stay at $95 until the end of this year, and then it will increase to $100 for the next 3 years and reach $130 per tonne by 2035. This lower carbon pricing gives industry the time and certainty it needs to plan, invest, and deliver emissions-reducing projects without undermining competitiveness. These milestones bring us significantly closer to building a West Coast pipeline, expanding our access to global markets, and creating jobs and prosperity here in Alberta and across Canada. Building on the landmark agreement reached in November 2025, Alberta and Canada have taken major steps to reduce regulatory uncertainty, expand market access, and advance critical energy infrastructure projects. And this work included commitment from the federal government not to proceed with a federal oil and gas emissions cap, abeyance on the federal clean electricity regulations in Alberta, agreement to advance an Indigenous co-owned oil pipeline to Asian markets, agreement on globally competitive industrial carbon pricing under Alberta's tier system, agreement in principle allowing Alberta to continue regulating methane under its existing system while achieving a 75% reduction from 2014 levels by 2035, impact assessment agreement to streamline project reviews, reduce duplication and reinforce provincial jurisdiction, access to a West Coast port, and removal of greenwashing provisions in the Competition Act. The bottom line is that we're close to making Canada a global energy superpower at a time when energy security has become a top priority around the world. Getting a West Coast pipeline built will unlock the enormous economic opportunities waiting for us on the other side of the Pacific. And it will position Canada as the supplier of choice for the world's energy needs today, tomorrow, and for decades to come. Both governments also remain committed to working together with the Oil Sands Alliance, formerly the Pathways Group of companies, to advance the completion of the world's largest carbon capture utilization and storage infrastructure project. This has the potential to position Alberta as a global leader in the development and implementation of large-scale emissions reduction infrastructure through carbon capture utilization and storage. At the same time, we are advancing the final submission of the West Coast Pipeline to the Major Projects Office by July 1st. We're also establishing an electricity working group with the federal government to explore new low emissions technologies, including nuclear, geothermal, abated natural gas, wind, solar, and hydrogen. As this work advances, the governments of Alberta and Canada remain committed to respecting constitutionally protected rights, engaging in early, consistent, and meaningful consultation with First Nations, and working with Indigenous communities to support opportunities for ownership and partnership. and will continue to work with the federal government to keep this momentum going so that we can supply reliable and secure energy to our trading partners and deliver lasting economic growth here in Canada. I look forward to sharing more in the months ahead as we continue this critical work. Thank you, and for the media, I'm happy to take your questions.
And we'll go into our media Q&A now. We'll be taking one question and one follow-up, and please state your name and outlet before asking your question. We'll start off at the mics before going on to the phone lines, and we'll go to our first at the mic. Go ahead and ask a question.
Hi, Premier. Matt Skase, the Globe and Mail. So the federal government and Alberta have both talked about the need for investor confidence to get a private proponent to build a West Coast pipeline. At the same time, Alberta is pursuing an appeal in pursuit of having the courts allow a vote to break apart the country, and your government refuses to rule out using its power to call an independence referendum. How do you square fighting for a secession question while providing investor confidence?
Well, there's often off-topic questions, so I might ask our guests if you want to take a seat. I'll call one of you up if you want to, if we get some on-topic questions. Yeah, sure. Just so you don't have to stand behind me making faces. Look, I mean, I support sovereignty within the United Canada. That means something. That means Alberta should stay a part of Canada and continue to pursue and support and enshrine our constitutionally invested rights, and also make sure that the federal government respects them. That's what today is about. It's not just saying, this is the way the federal government works, so we just have to accept it. It's saying, you know what, the country can work better. And it works better when we respect our equal areas of jurisdiction and we find areas of overlap. That's what I've been doing since November, is what I will keep on doing every single day to convince Albertans that Canada can work, and it will work, and it is working in the best interest not only of us but also of Canada. The issue regarding the court judgment, and I have to say there's sort of two judgments that came out at about the same time. One judgment was saying, was against the Citizens Initiative Act altogether, saying it shouldn't proceed because all questions that could potentially be asked by citizens would be deemed in need of some kind of consent. And that was rejected. So that one came out because it was overly broad. So then it was followed up by this one that seems to put a requirement on Citizens Initiative to do a duty of consultation. And quite frankly, I don't even know how that would be possible. How are citizens who want to put a petition question forward supposed to comply with that? That effectively negates the Citizen Initiative Act. That's why I've said it's anti-democratic and we think it's an error in law. So we want to preserve the right of citizens to be able to have broad latitude to ask these questions on whatever topic they choose, and we will have to have a meeting with caucus and cabinet to figure out the particulars of the one that has been struck down. But the judgment itself has much broader implications for our citizens' initiative process, and we think that's the reason it needs to be challenged.
Okay. Do you think, though, that you can get a private proponent behind a pipeline if there's a referendum on separation hanging over Alberta for who knows how long? Well,
I think that what we need to do is make sure that the separatist sentiment is not as high as it has been in the last year. When the Liberals got elected, separatist sentiment went up to 42%. In our most recent polling, we've seen that it's somewhere between 33 and 35%, so it's coming down. Historically, it's been under 20%. That's where I'd like it to be again. I'd like for us to have Albertans feel such confidence that Canada is working for them that that separatist sentiment it goes back to historically low levels. We're not quite there yet. There's a few more things that we need to do, but I think these kinds of agreements help to get us there, and that's what I need to work towards. So at the moment, I think that we have a pretty good deal that we're going to be able to celebrate. I think this will go a long way towards demonstrating that the new Prime Minister approaches the issue of cooperative federalism in a very different way than the previous Prime Minister has for the last 10 years. Now, it may not be the deciding factor for everyone, but it's going to, I believe, convince a few more people that Canada's worth fighting for and it's worth working towards.
Do you think a referendum?
Thank you, Matt. We're going to have to go to our next question. We're tight today.
David Winnick, Western Standard. Premier, do you think the carbon tax will make it harder to find a private proponent for the pipeline?
Well, everybody, I guess maybe I should clarify, because people were accustomed to the retail carbon tax. This is not a retail carbon tax. You will not see this on your diesel or gasoline or any of your fill-up bills. You will not see it on your home heating bill. That the federal government got rid of with a lot of pressure from us, other provinces, and of course the federal Conservatives. But this is an industrial price that has been on industrial emissions since 2007. We actually were the first ones to put it in place. It got we went to court, and the court determined that the federal government has the right to set a floor price. That's part of the overlapping jurisdiction that we have. But it does apply to those facilities that are emitting more than 100,000 tons of emissions per year. So just keep in mind, that's where we believe we can make the biggest impact on reducing emissions, and also the biggest impact on adopting new technology. And what we found is that this mechanism where we reward those companies who do best available technology, and we have companies who are lagging behind pay, it has led to an incredible amount of innovation. That's why we've kept it for the past 20 years. So is it going to be too high? Well, I can tell you 170 by 2030 was way too high, which is why we froze it this year. And we'll do some more industry consultation, but the early feedback we've got from the industry is that they believe that this slower ramp up is going to be manageable for the companies that are going to be exposed to it.
Okay, and do you think if Ottawa had approved a pipeline years ago, the independence movement would be where it's at now in terms of momentum?
Well, I can tell, as I said, I mean, it's vitally important that this deal was signed, because I think there's a number of decisions the federal government made that ended up eroding confidence. And it's not just about getting a pipeline built. It was that they took away aspirationally of us ever getting another pipeline to be built ever again. Because we do have Trans Mountain Pipeline, we do have Coastal GasLink, which is expanding in natural gas, but essentially staring into a future where not only we would never be able to build another pipeline, but we'd have to start shutting in our existing production, which is what several independent consultant reports said, by 2 million barrels a day by 2035. And all of the impact that would have on our finances, on our taxes, on our ability to pay for services, that it was that combination of packages. Same thing with the net zero power regs. That may, in fact, be the biggest thing that came out of our early MOU. And the announcement you saw the Prime Minister make earlier in the week that natural gas, yes, has to be part of our electricity grid in order to be able to provide stability. 90% of our daily use of power typically comes from natural gas. And we've already paid billions of dollars to switch from coal. We know that solar, wind, and batteries are not able to continue fueling our continued growth. So that, to me, having that limitation was also causing some of the frustration. Frankly, I've also mentioned to the Prime Minister, people are frustrated at immigration policy that took place under his predecessor. I'm glad to see that he's making some changes there. And a lot of the separatist movement is being fueled by those who are law-abiding gun owners who are going to be made criminals by the existing federal firearms bans on guns that come into effect in October. So I think that this will help a lot towards a group of folks who were disaffected because of economic issues. I think some of the changes on immigration that we're going to be proposing in the fall will also help address some of the concerns, but I still think there's some other outstanding issues, and in particular the gun issue I think is a big one.
Thanks, David, and we'll go to our next question.
Hey, Tim with CTV. Yesterday you were chatting about the court ruling, the judge's ruling, and you kind of hinted that maybe the notwithstanding clause was on the table here. Constitutional lawyers say that's out of the question. Yep. So number one, why bring it up? And number two, what are kind of your options if you do appeal and you lose? Well,
the Constitution does give rights to provinces and to the federal government, and I think that there's some grounds to be able to challenge the court decision on this in particular, because my concern is that it's an overread and an overreach on the issue of duty to consult. Duty to consult, as I understand it, has been project specific. It's you have a particular project, it has particular impact on the adjacent bands when it comes to their hunting, fishing and trapping rights, maybe use of water. And so there's a very defined project that you have to do, and you have a defined duty to consult. I have no idea how the court would expect a citizens group to be able to meet the duty to consult that was just made up in that judgment. And so that's why it needs to be challenged, is because otherwise it could potentially negate our Citizens Initiative Act, and it could be a reach-in of the court on every single bill that we could ever pass that could ever possibly have an impact on First Nations. And that is a pretty dramatic curtailment of provincial rights under the Constitution. So I think I would encourage you to look at it more broadly, that when these court decisions are left unappealed, it can lead to consequences like we see in British Columbia, where they thought that they were passing just statements of intent and cooperation, and now their entire property rights and development regime is under uncertainty because of court decisions. So we don't want to go down that path in Alberta. We think the court has overreached here. We think they've made an undemocratic decision that isn't valid in law. It's an error in law, and that's why we're going to challenge it.
You've kind of downplayed the role of the courts here. I just want to know at what point, what ruling needs to come down, what appeal needs to be denied before you say that's enough? Or do we reach a point where you say, no, I'm ignoring this and this referendum can go forward?
Well, Supreme Courts we honor those rulings, and that's what I think we have to understand, that a single judge appointed by Justin Trudeau can't override what 700,000 people in this province have said they want. I think that if you want to be a democratic government and run a democratic province, there has to be some deference of the court to the democratic process. I just don't simply believe that an unelected judge should be able to run roughshod over all of these democratic provisions, especially when we've been very clear as a legislature that we wanted the Citizen Initiative Act to be very permissive. We understand that if it comes to a point of implementation, there's a duty on us as government to make sure that Aboriginal rights are respected. But it would be impossible for a citizen group to be able to meet that standard. And so that's why we think it needs to be challenged.
Thanks, Tim. We have time for a few more questions. We'll go to our next at the mic.
Good afternoon, Premier Jason Markusoff from CBC News. You were talking in your event earlier with Prime Minister Carney about how the carbon price was rolled back significantly. There are other concessions and other things. I'm wondering, in the negotiations, what would you pinpoint as the concessions that Alberta made to reach this deal?
Well, I can tell you that even though we have a carbon price, if I had my druthers on what it would be set at, it would probably be somewhere around $50 a ton. Because if you look at some of the work of Ross McKittrick, he has indicated you could have actually a much lower carbon price and still send the signals to investors about and create an incentive market where they would move more towards emissions. But those are the things that we have to negotiate. The Supreme Court made a decision that the federal government has the right to set a floor price. And so we have to make sure that that floor price is a negotiated price that is going to have minimal impact on the investment climate. So I would say that was a pretty big concession on our part. The contracts for difference as well, like those are can bear the potential of some downside. I know the way that's supposed to work. So for instance, the way contracts for difference work in electricity is you guarantee the price is going to be 8 cents a kilowatt hour. And when it's above, which it was for some time at 32 cents a kilowatt hour, then we get paid. If it's below, as it is right now, about 3 to 4 cents a kilowatt hour, then we have to pay. And my understanding is we're paying about $100 million a year because our prices are low. So we know the perils of signing on to contracts for difference because it could go either way. But we were able to limit both ours and Canada's liability on that. And so I think that was a place where the Prime Minister felt very strongly we needed carbon markets that worked, and that was an essential aspect of it. And so we came to a negotiation on that. But it wouldn't have been necessarily, since we've been bitten on them before, wouldn't have been my preference to have those kinds of agreements, but those are the kind of concessions you need to make.
A few weeks ago, you ruled out the option of using the Referendum Act to yourself as a government put the independence question on the ballot for October 19th. That was before the Justice Leonard ruling. Now we have Jeffrey Rath and Mitch Sylvester saying that you need to do this if you're interested in your own political self-preservation to stay on the job. Can you please walk us through your thoughts on, at this point, the downsides and upsides of the Alberta government putting forth a Referendum Act question itself on independence?
Well, I have to have that conversation first with my caucus and cabinet, and there is a committee that is that's assessing the Forever Canada petition right now, so it's a bit premature for me to figure out what my caucus and cabinet might want to do.
Let's hear your thinking on this.
Well, again, my thinking is that we should be very permissive, and that citizens should have been allowed to put these questions forward, and then depending on what the outcome is, that's when government acts. And so we're still analyzing what the court judgment said. As I mentioned, we are appealing it. We're waiting for the committee to do their work, and I'll be having a cabinet and caucus meeting next week, and so we'll be able to walk you through it at that time after I've talked to them.
Thank you. We have time for one or two more questions. We'll go to next to the mic.
I'm Felix from Radio Canada. How about the next few steps? When can we expect an agreement with pathways and consultation with the First Nations to begin?
The engagement has already begun. There's a higher standard when you move from engagement into consultation, but I can tell you Minister Rajan Sawhney, our Indigenous Relations Minister, she has an entire team from British Columbia that is advising her, and she's done many trips to meet with bands. I think she's going again next week, as are some other senior members of our team. And so we're getting very close to the July 1st deadline for submitting a pipeline proposal. So we've got a pretty good idea right now about what the most economic routes are. And when you know that route, then you're able to identify the bands that are going to be most impacted. And so we'll be working with them one-on-one to let them know what the economic benefits might be, what the equity ownership might look like based on some of the experience that we've had here. I just heard Minister Sawhney talk about the 9 projects that we've underwritten, and they in combination are going to provide $1.5 billion worth of economic benefit over their lifetime to the bands that have signed on to those. So there's going to be substantial life-changing amounts of money potentially from these kinds of agreements. So we want to make sure that they understand that as we're working with them through the consultation process. But the engagement's already begun, and as soon as the project submission happens after July 1st, then that triggers formal consultation, which will also begin in earnest.
All right, and in the ongoing negotiation with the BC, is there a revenue sharing agreement with BC on the table?
Well, I think BC has some kind of toll on each barrel that goes through TMX. I think you might have to talk with the Government of Canada and with BC about what that arrangement is. But I think if there was any kind of economic benefit to British Columbia, it would probably model what they already do on TMX.
Thank you. We have time for one last question. We're going to head to the phones. Operator, could you put through our first caller, please?
Your next question comes from the line of Jack Farrell from the Canadian Press. Please go ahead.
So as part of the agreement today, there's some kind of talk about renewable energy in Alberta, making some commitments around it, and specifically like facilitating more of it. Should we take this as like a shift or even like an about face on wind and solar energy for your government, on the moratorium and the pristine viewscape protections from, I guess that was last year, even the year before?
Well, there is no moratorium. It was a 6-month pause as we worked out the viewscape and agriculture first policy and developed some parameters around it. And we've, I believe, been approving about 2,700 megawatts a year of solar and wind projects for each of the last 3 years. So we are already have more installed solar and wind than any other province. We're at 38% installed, 23% generating power over the course of a year. But what we've said is we need a responsible amount of wind and solar to come on. When I came in, we had 0 projects for natural gas that provide the backup. You can't add wind, which only works 30% of the time, without having some backup. You can't add solar, which only works 10% of the time, without having backup. And so that was, the net zero power regs were impairing the success of our ability to bring those both on at the same time, because our natural gas producers, our power providers, were told that if they weren't 95% abated by 2035, there'd be the potential of jail time. So we weren't getting the balance that we needed. So we've always been supportive of having a responsible amount of intermittent fuels come on, but we're moving to a reliability market. And what that means is that there always has to be a backup, whether that's a water battery, an actual battery, or a peaker plant or something else. But I am particularly encouraged by geothermal. I went and visited the Ever site when I was in Germany, where they are providing heating to 36,000 homes, and they're engaged with us on our drilling accelerator. so that they can get to a depth, I think, of 10,000 to 15,000 meters, so that they can hit a pocket that's hot enough to be able to provide secure power. So if they can do that, then that and master that, then we can roll that kind of technology out, not only all over Alberta, but also all over the world. So we think geothermal is perhaps more consistent with our geology, with our native talent around drilling, and with our the expertise that we've already been able to develop, and it's also reliable power. So I'm agnostic on the type. They just have to be reliable, and as long as they can fit into that model, you'll see that we'll be very encouraged by it. The big thing that the Prime Minister was interested in was nuclear, and we've just finished our nuclear consultation. Headed by MLA Chantal de Jong. We either have or will soon release the recommendations from that, but we receive very positive feedback through the consultation, and figuring out how to bring that onto the grid is going to be something collectively that we'll work with between Saskatchewan and British Columbia with the enhancement of interties. So that agreement is yet to come, but we've agreed to another working group that will establish that by January of 2027.
And then you said a bit earlier how this agreement in the MOU as a whole, it's not going to completely take out the separatist movement. And yesterday the Prime Minister said, he was asked, will a pipeline restore or kind of maintain national unity, or was he building one to maintain national unity? And he said no. My question for you is, do you think that Alberta Forever now will just actually have like this hardcore group of separatists, and there's really nothing at all that anyone, like any elected official, can actually do to, restore their faith, as you say?
Well, I think that what people should take from the process that the Prime Minister and I went through over the last 6 months is that that's how cooperative federalism should work. Is that if you have a disagreement on policy about how you should proceed, and especially if it's one that enters into a provincial jurisdiction or significantly impacts our resource development, that shouldn't be done unilaterally, as it was done for the past 10 years with the previous Trudeau regime. I think what I saw over the past 6 months is a Prime Minister who, maybe because he lived in Europe, understands cooperative federalism, understands that there's certain things that you do at the central level, and there's certain things that you've got to let the province do, and then there's other things that you got to get to a table and sort out. And I think that he even talked about cooperative federalism, and I think this is a demonstration of that. So what I would expect is that as these issues arise, I hope there's not going to be a whole lot more of them. I'd mentioned a couple that are still causing some friction. But as those issues arise, I would expect, just from what I've seen out of the Prime Minister, that that's how we would deal with them. And I think that's what Canadians would expect. I think that's what Albertans expect. I think other provincial premiers appreciate that kind of approach. And I just wish that it hadn't got to this point. I just wish that this is the way that cooperative federalism had worked for the previous 10 years, because we might not have seen that anger and frustration and despair build up the way it did. So we're trying to win people back, decision by decision, to understanding that the country can work. And I think this is a good day for us to have done that. It's a good day for Alberta, and it's a good day for Canada.
Thank you. That'll conclude today's press conference.
Thanks, everyone.